Hey everyone, listen, I just want to welcome you back to a Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. Normally we do these on Monday, but for whatever reason, we had all these tech issues yesterday, so I had to reschedule to today. And I want to thank you for joining me. If you're catching this on replay or if you're catching this live, no matter where you are, I really appreciate it. And in an effort to make sure that we're not continuing tech issues, let me know that you can hear and see me in the chat box. And while you're doing that, I'll talk a little bit about today's topic. Today, we are going to talk about 6 truckload accessorial charges that every freight broker needs to know. First, I'm going to talk about what are accessorial charges. And then I'm going to talk about 6 of them, the most common that you're going to run into as a freight broker or freight agent. So let me know again in the comments if you guys can see me, hear me, give me a heads up. That would be great. All right, awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Carl. Appreciate it. The reason why I'm curious is because we started using a brand new software yesterday, and several times over the last month, we've had some tech issues using a streaming provider that I've been using for many years. And apparently they've just had some major tech issues. So I had to kick them to the curb and bring in a new streaming provider. And so this is the first time going live using this new provider. So I'd love your feedback. Hopefully you guys are getting a good experience. Again, today, for those of you that are just joining, we're going to talk about 6 truckload accessorial charges that every freight broker needs to know. But before we do that, I'm going to give a shout out. Let me know in the comments where you guys are logging in from. Where are you logging in? What city and state? I'm in Buffalo, New York. The other great advantage of this new software is I'm actually streaming not only on Facebook, but I'm streaming on YouTube as well, which is very cool. So I'm streaming in my Facebook group, which is my Freight Broker Bootcamp members only group, which is paid members only. I'm also streaming on the Facebook page, the actual Freight Broker Bootcamp page, and I'm also streaming on my YouTube channel. So that's actually kind of cool as well. So type in the chat box where you guys are logging in from. I'll give you a quick shout out and then we'll get the ball rolling. So welcome. Oh boy, we got a bunch of people here. Awesome. So we got, let's head up to the top here. All right, cool. So we've got Chris. We got Reggie from DC. We got Chris from Burnsville, Minnesota. Victor from Odessa, Missouri. Max from Toronto. Travis from Charleston. Sherry from Chicago. Just a guy being a dude from the middle of nowhere. Megan Moody from Travelers, South Carolina. Leon from Calmessa, California. We got Tony from Yonkers, New York. The Patriot Marine from San Diego, California. We got Scott from Merced, California. Edward from Houston. Jeez, man, you guys are coming in from all over the place. That's awesome. I love it. We got Leonardo from Honduras, all the way from Honduras. We got Benson from Atlanta, Georgia. We got Bryant Brown from Arkansas. We got Josue from New Jersey. So again, we've got people joining us on YouTube. We got people joining us in the Facebook group. We got people joining us in the on the Facebook page. So I'm excited about this, and I hope that this goes off well. I truly appreciate you being here. Today, we're going to talk about 6 truckload accessorial charges that every freight broker needs to know. But before we do that, just for those of you that the first timers here, my name is Dennis Brown. I've been an entrepreneur for over 25 years. Kind of hard to say that because 25 years is a long time. Built 3 multi-million-dollar companies in my career, was very blessed. Started a freight brokerage in 2003, grew that company to over $80 million a year in sales, and then sold it. But I also am the owner of FreightBrokerBootcamp.com, which is the industry's most cost-effective and comprehensive online freight broker training program. Had that for over a decade, have trained over 8,000 students in that time. Many of them have went on to build 6 and 7 and even 8-figure businesses. So I'm super excited. If you're curious about Freight Broker Bootcamp, you can check that out. Again, I'm not selling anything here today. This is a free training. So for those of you that are ready to get going, hit that like button and share the stream. The cost of admission for you to be here today to get this free training is to simply hit the like button and share the stream. That would be fantastic. Truly appreciate all your help. And so here we go, guys. I'm going to dive into the training. And at the end of this, we're going to do a live Q&A. Okay. So I'm going to do some Q&A. We're going to see how this works. Maybe we'll get some questions from YouTube. Maybe we'll get some questions from Facebook. And we're going to see how we roll here. So far, it seems like the technology is going off without a hitch. So fingers crossed. And again, if you're catching this on replay, thank you so much for being here. All right, guys. So once again, today we are going to talk about 6 truckload accessorial charges that every freight broker needs to know about. But we're going to start with what are accessorial charges? What is an accessorial, right? So I wanted to make sure that this was very clear. So I jotted this down. Accessorial charges are fees above and beyond the per mile and fuel rate that are added to your freight charge for additional services that the carrier may provide. So these are charges outside of your line haul plus fuel, your normal freight charge, for services that a carrier may have to provide during transit, right? Some point before they're dispatched all the way through to delivery, okay? So these are additional charges beyond the normal freight charge that they would get. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about 6 of those today. And now I'm not going to go in any specific order, but I am going to go over the 6 that are the most common. I'm going to give you a quick description of what that is. And then I'm going to tell you kind of what those charges typically are today, right? And you're going to see a bit of a range here. So number 1 on the list, I got a list here. Number 1 on the list is called a reconsignment. Now, a reconsignment is when a shipment's destination is changed after the freight has been picked up by the carrier. So the carrier gets dispatched into the pickup location, they load the truck, and then the driver goes on his way. And during transit, they change the delivery location and they reconsign it to a new location. Now, that reconsignment charge is typically somewhere between $50 and $100 plus any out of route miles. So if there's added miles to the load because they're reconsigning it to a different location, that charge is going to change. That per mile, your overall rate is going to change. Not only are you going to get a reconsignment fee of $50 to $100, but you're also going to pay any out of route miles. Okay, so that's a reconsignment. You will run into that from time to time. For whatever reason, they want to reroute the shipment to another location, and that's called reconsignment. All right. Number 2 is a layover, a driver layover. A driver layover will apply if a truck is unable to get loaded or unloaded. Typically, it's the unload side. So let's say, for example, you get a truck loaded, they go to the destination, they're in line to get unloaded, and for whatever reason, they can't unload the truck that day. Maybe there's a piece of equipment that they need in order to unload the truck. Maybe they don't have enough people. Maybe it's just too late, whatever the case may be, but the driver is unable to get unloaded at the destination on the agreed upon day and time. And so what happens is sometimes you will request a driver layover. And that means the driver will have to stay over till the next day to get that freight off his truck, right? And so those charges typically range for a driver layover. There's a pretty big range there, anywhere between $200 and up to $500 per day for a driver layover. Okay, so that can get kind of expensive. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen from time to time. And it's something important that you definitely want to understand what a driver layover is. So if a driver's unable to get his freight off the truck on the agreed upon day and time, and he won't be able to unload it till the next day, it's called a driver layover. And that typically is going to cost you somewhere between $200 and $500. You're able to negotiate that with the carrier. All right, so that's number 2. Number 3 is what's called a lumper. Now, a lumper is when the carrier, typically the driver, the carrier, has to hire a service to unload the truck, right? So they get to a destination. Maybe it's a grocery warehouse, which was where it happens quite frequently. You'll get to that destination and they need somebody to unload the truck or to sort and segregate the truck, change the pallets, move product from one type of pallet to another. But ultimately they need to they call it a lumper because they need to lump that freight out of the truck onto the dock, okay? So those lumper services, that can range that can vary considerably, right? So the charges for that can vary depending upon the complexity of what they have to do and how much freight it is. Anywhere between $7,500 or $75, I've seen as high as $500. Okay. So that's the lumper fee. So that's when the driver carrier delivers the product and they need to then hire somebody at the dock. There's typically lumper services there or unload services. They're usually independent services that actually provide that service. And they'll have to pay them anywhere between $75 and $500. Okay, so that's an example of another accessorial charge outside of the normal freight charges. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is truck ordered not used. So what we mean by that, truck ordered not used happens in brokerage. And usually what happens is that's where a broker hires a carrier, signs a rate confirmation, gets a rate confirmation back from the carrier. And then what happens is after, at some point, they then cancel that truck before the truck is loaded. Now, there's usually some sort of a timeline in there. It's either the same day or within a certain amount of hours or before the truck is dispatched. But ultimately, they order a truck and then they cancel that order with the carriers. That's called a truck ordered not used. Okay. And so what that is that's a fee that typically ranges somewhere between $150 and $250. And again, it's based upon some sort of a deadline that you have determined either in your agreement or in your accessorial surcharge sheet, where if you do order a truck, if you do agree to pay a carrier for a load, and then you cancel that last minute, some timeline, usually it's the same day. If it's the day before, it's usually not an issue, but if it's the same day or definitely after you've dispatched the truck into the pickup location, you're definitely going to have to compensate that driver and carrier with some sort of a truck ordered not used. Those fees typically range somewhere between $150 and $250 for the truck ordered not used. Okay. So that's number 4. Number 5 is what's called a stop charge. Now, a stop charge is exactly that. Each additional stop that you make on a run, all right, on a load, usually has an ancillary charge. So if it's a one pick, one drop, there's not going to be any additional charges. But if it's a one pick and they've got 3 drops, each time they have to stop at a different location, there's going to be an additional stop charge. Most of those stop charges range anywhere between $50 and $75. They might go up to $100 if there's a lot of stops, because again, a multi-stop load is going to cost the driver time, right? Because they're stopping at 2 or 3 or 4 different destinations. It might make that load take an extra day or 2. So there will be stop fees. If you have more than one pick or more than one drop on a load, don't be surprised if there is some sort of a stop charge, and these usually range somewhere between $50 and $75 for a stop fee. Okay, that's number 5. And the one that you're going to run into most often in transportation as a whole is detention. This is number 6, right? So number 6 is the one that you run in most often. It's called detention, right? And so detention is a fee that's charged by the carrier, right? When a driver has to sit too long to get loaded and unloaded. Now, in most cases, most drivers give you 2 hours for free on the load and unload side. Now that's combined. So that means on the load side, you get an hour, and on the unload side, you get an hour. So you get 2 hours for free. That's usually the baseline for most carriers. Beyond those 2 hours, they're going to charge you an hourly rate. And that hourly rate ranges somewhere between $25 and $100 per hour, and is typically negotiated each carrier, either you establish an accessorial charge up front, maybe in your transportation, your broker carrier agreement, or it's something that's agreed up front so that everybody understands, because detention does happen. Just so you understand, detention happens all the times. A lot of times they'll get loaded a little bit late. Sometimes they'll get, they'll deliver on time and they'll get unloaded, and it'll just take a long time for the driver to get unloaded. And you got to understand something. What happens is if that driver's wheels are not moving, he's not making money. So the detention charge is designed to help offset his time of not being able to move his truck into another load, into another destination because he's unable to make money. So it's a very fair charge. Now, the thing about these accessorial charges that I want you to understand, number one, those are all 6. One was a reconsignment. Number 2 is a layover, a driver layover. Number 3 is a lumper. Number 4 was a truck order not used. Number 5 was a stop charge. And number 6 is detention, right? Is detention charges. Now, there are many more types of accessorials depending upon what mode of transportation, whether you're using rail or you're using air or you're using ocean or you're doing LTL. But ultimately, these are the ones that you're going to run into most often if you're moving full truckload, which is what most brokers do, okay? But what I want you to understand, and a key part here, okay, is that accessorial charges are not designed to be a profit center for brokers. So you're not necessarily going to mark those charges up where if, for example, you are charged $50 an hour by a carrier for detention, you're not necessarily going to mark that up and charge your shipper $75 or $100. It's typically, most accessorials are a straight pass through from the carrier, whatever you pay the carrier, directly through to the shipper. So if you get a $50 detention charge for 1 hour, that shipper, of course, is going to have to pay that $50 detention charge for 1 hour, okay? The same thing with truck order not used and all of those different accessorial charges, okay? So I think that's important to note. It should not be a profit center for brokers. It should simply be a pass-through directly to the shipper. Now, when you're dealing with accessorial charges with shippers, it's important that you establish the accessorial charge and charges up front. So it'd be nice to send them a 1-pager that defines your accessorial charges. And then if they initial it or they agree to it via email, at that point, then you're going to have to notify the shipper when those issues happen. Typically, an example that happens very common is detention. Your driver is going to let you know as the broker that they've now went into detention. They're past the 2 hours. You're going to have to let the shipper know so that they can make sure they authorize it so you can ensure you get paid on that. And then at that point, they're going to want to know how much detention was there, give them an update, add it to the bill, add it to the freight charge, and then make sure the carrier gets paid and the shipper will make sure they pay you. And the same thing goes for all of the different accessorial charges. So I hope that helped. Well, listen, that was the 6 truckload accessorial charges that every freight broker needs to know. It's important that you understand the fundamentals there because it can make or break you. Just understanding this literally could probably save you $1,000 over the first year of your brokerage, whether you're a freight broker or a freight agent. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. And listen, we're going to jump into some Q&A, but ultimately, if you guys are curious about becoming a freight broker or freight agent, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. We offer several packages where you can get enrolled and get instant access to the entire course online. We offer a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. And we're widely regarded as the #1 most comprehensive and cost-effective online freight broker training program available today. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Listen, we're going to jump into a Q&A. I'm going to grab a quick drink here while we do, but we're going to jump into a Q&A. If you haven't liked the stream yet on Facebook or on YouTube or wherever you're watching it, make sure you do that. If you haven't shared the stream, please do that. Let me know that you guys are enjoying this because, again, I do these trainings every single week. I don't charge you for them. These lessons came at the cost of literally millions of dollars to myself, learning the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the pros and cons, and everything that works and doesn't work in brokerage. And I share it with you for free every Monday at noon. Now, this is an exception. I know it's Tuesday, but that was because we had a tech issue. Normally, these are always going to be Monday at noon. Okay, when you're going to be able to access these. So next week, make sure Monday at noon, you set a reminder on your calendar or on your iPhone or whatever, so that you're here because I pick a new topic every single week. And so we're going to jump into some Q&A. Give me just a second to grab a drink and we'll get things rolling. All right. So what do we got here? I must have lost you for a second. That was a technical glitch on my part. Sorry about that. All right. So what do we got for questions here? All right, let me dive in here and see what we got for questions. Sorry about that little tech issue. I wasn't exactly sure how to do that. All right. Okay, so Michael asked the question, what's the difference between determination and layover? I think you meant detention and layover, okay? So detention is a charge that you pay a carrier when they are getting unloaded the same day. So if the unload is delayed during that same day, and that's unload an hour, delayed an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours, you're going to pay a normal detention charge. If they are required to lay over to the next day, you will pay a driver layover. You're not going to pay both. You're not going to pay a layover and detention. You're typically only going to pay one. Okay. So yeah, that's the difference. Hope that helps, Michael. Good question. Thank you. All right, so Shania asks, what's the detention charge again? So Shania, detention charge is this. A driver pulls up to his delivery location. He waits in line. And what's happening is because he's at the shipper, his clock, once he's in line to unload, that clock starts to run. It's not when he gets to the dock, it's when he gets in line. So he now gets in line and he waits for 2 hours. He's only got an hour left, right, to get unloaded before there's detention charges, and they run over that hour. They don't get him in for 2 hours, and then it takes him another hour to unload, right? Just hypothetically. That would mean anything beyond the 2 hours, which was an additional 2 hours, the driver would be due detention charges, which typically range somewhere between 50 and $100 an hour, okay, for detention, right? So ultimately, detention is an extra fee that's paid per hour beyond the normal 2-hour limit for load and unload time. And that's combined 2 hours on the load and unload, not 2 hours on load and 2 hours on unload, okay? Want to make that clear, but good question. Thanks, Shania. All right, I'm scrolling through. So here's a question from the Patriot Marine. All right. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. All right, so the Patriot Marine asks, what's the process for charging the shipper for layovers and detention? Number one, thank you for your service. Appreciate it. Never want to forget that. Secondly, the process for charging the shipper for layovers and detention is to send a revised rate confirmation or an email confirming that they agree to those charges. So what will happen is you will revise the rate and send the shipper a new rate confirmation, or via email, you will send them an update and have them reply confirming that they agree to the charges and have some sort of a load number or some sort of a BOL or some sort of a tracking number associated with that load, so that you can then include that in the bill so that when it goes to the other end, they know that it was an authorized charge. That's the two simplest ways for you to make sure you get it authorized. And then from there, you're just going to include that authorization in the bill itself when you do send them the freight bill, right? That's typically how it'll work. So good question. Thanks for asking. All right, I'm scrolling through here. Just give me a minute. Here's a good question. Leonardo asks, Dennis, are the charges specific in carrier setup package agreement between broker and carrier, or are this accessorial charges negotiated when it actually happens? Good question. It's smart to include your accessorial charges either as a part of your broker carrier agreement, maybe as an addendum to your broker carrier agreement, or to make sure that it's part of that carrier broker packet that goes out to them so that they understand these are the charges that you can authorize for the different accessorials, right? So it's always easier to be transparent up front. and at least let people know what your charges are. They may argue that. They may say, we're not taking $50 for detention. We need $100 for detention. That typically don't happen. Or they may go through that. But if not, you're still going to have to discuss it at the end. And it may turn into a little bit of a negotiation at that point, even though you say you only pay $150 for truck order not used. You may have to negotiate with them and pay them $175 or $200 because maybe they had a little bit of a deadhead, or maybe you got back to them a little bit late, or whatever the case may be. But ultimately, you should be transparent with what your accessorial charges are, either in your broker carrier agreement or your broker carrier packet. Okay. The same thing goes for your shipper packet and your shipper agreement. You should also define your accessorials there. Now, a lot of times shippers are going to tell you what they're going to pay for accessorials. They're going to define that. They're going to say, here's what we pay for detention. Here's what we pay for they're typically not going to do truck order not used, but sometimes that does happen. And then also driver layover, the common accessorial charges. So it's good on both sides to be transparent, but you can obviously negotiate when it does happen. Detention is something you want to have very clear, because that's going to happen a lot. It happens all the time, right? Driver layovers and truck order not used doesn't happen that often, but ultimately detention is something you're going to see a lot. And if you have a successful brokerage, it's going to happen every day, right? It's going to be a regular occurrence. So good question. Thank you. Yeah, so Josue asked a good question. What happens if the shipper refuses to pay detention or layover? I still responsible for the carrier. Well, first of all, they'd have to have a very good reason why they're not going to pay it. And if they have a very good reason, then that's the same reason why you're not going to pay the carrier. Okay. But it has to be a legitimate reason, right? So for example, carriers can't get detention if they show up late to their delivery appointment and they still get unloaded, right? So an example is if they had a 12 o'clock delivery appointment and they showed up at 1 and they had to wait a little bit of extra time to get unloaded, they can't charge for detention, right? Same thing for a driver layover. If they show up late for their appointment and then they can't get unloaded that day, you're not going to get a driver layover. So if it's a legitimate reason why the shipper's not paying it, then you'll use the exact same reason with the carrier. Now, if the shipper's just being obstinate and is saying they're not going to pay you for whatever reason, ultimately you are responsible, and you should try to pay the carrier and negotiate something that's fair. Let them know that your shipper is not going to pay you because of this reason, and try to negotiate something that works for you. Have I paid carriers when shippers haven't paid me? Yes, I have paid carriers. It doesn't happen very often, but I have done that in situations where it wasn't the carrier's fault. It was glaringly obvious it wasn't the carrier's fault. I then later on billed the shipper and tried to negotiate with them later as a way to offset my cost. Sometimes it worked. Most times it worked. But in the heat of the moment, sometimes shippers are upset. But if you had to pay $100 in detention, later on you can sometimes get that back. Or it can just be the price of doing business. But ultimately, the lifetime value of a shipper is much more than losing, $50 or $100 in detention. So I hope that makes sense. Good question, Josue. Yeah, Amanda, just to reiterate, accessorial charges should not be a profit center for brokers. It should really be a true pass through. Yeah, it's only fair, right? I think that's only fair. So here's a good question. This is not about accessorial charges, but it's interesting. Tony Leone asked, what are the benefits of being a broker versus being a carrier? Very simple. If you are a carrier, and let's just say, statistically speaking, it's like 80% of carriers have less than 6 trucks. At any given point, if you are a carrier with 6 trucks, you can only move 6 loads at a time, max. So at any given point, you've got the wheels moving on 6 trucks. You're making money on the wheels that are moving for 6 trucks. Now, if you're a broker, right, and if you're a carrier with 6 trucks, you can't move more than 6 loads at a time. But if you're a broker, you can move dozens, if not hundreds of loads at a time. By the time that I sold my brokerage, right, we were doing hundreds of loads per day, and I didn't own any trucks. Now, if I'd have had 10 trucks, I would have only been able to move 10 loads on my trucks, but it gives you additional capacity. It gives you additional resources to be able to generate revenue and profit for your business. So that's the biggest reason why the benefits of being a broker versus just being a carrier. Okay, so now if you're an owner operator or you're a small carrier, it gives you the opportunity to add extra income, because now if you were moving 6 loads on your trucks and then you move 6 more brokered loads, you literally have potentially have doubled your revenue and probably more than doubled your profit, right? So at the end of the day, it gives you the biggest benefit to earn more income, right? So there are a lot of other reasons, but that's probably the biggest one. Good question. Thanks, Tony. Gavin, the industry standard for free time when detention is concerned is typically 2 hours on the load unload. So you get 2 hours on the load unload combined, not 2 hours on both ends. Now you can negotiate with carriers. Sometimes carriers will allow you a little bit of extra time, but at the end of the day, your shippers need to be prepared to pay detention fees anything beyond 2 hours total for load unload times. Good question. Thank you. I'm scrolling here. Let me find some more questions. Okay, so here's a good question from Leonardo. Who pays the detention at the consignee location? Um, will pay it. Will pay it the consignee or consignor? Typically, on any given shipment, whether it be the pickup or the delivery location, the shipper that ordered the truck, right, that ordered that load, is going to be responsible for the detention. Okay. Now they may have to, as a shipper, go back to one of their other locations, whether that be one of their suppliers or one of their clients, and somehow charge them for that. But you, as the broker, will be charging the shipper, whether it be on the pickup or the drop location. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. You're never as a broker gonna charge a delivery location. So let's say, for example, I pick up at ABC Manufacturing and I deliver something to one of their clients at XYZ retailer, and they get the freight off the truck late. I'm never going to invoice that XYZ retailer for detention because I don't have a relationship with them and they didn't authorize me to charge them detention. I'm then going to charge the shipper that ordered the truck, and then that shipper, if they choose to, they can go back to the client and try to recover some of those costs. So good question. Thanks for asking. Lots of question about detention and accessorials. I like it. I think I picked a good topic. So for those of you that are asking specific about charges, if a carrier is asking for high charges for some sort of detention or driver layover or truck order not used, it's something that you need to negotiate. It's just something you need to negotiate. And if you stated it in your agreement, in your broker carrier agreement, then you revolve back on that and say, listen, this is what I authorized and this is what we're willing to pay. They can charge whatever they want, but you agree based upon the contract and based upon what's been established before the load. They can't just randomly put some sort of a charge out there. So it's something that you would have to negotiate. I'm scrolling. Yeah, so this is a good question. So Asimov asks, how do you pay lumper fee if you don't have ComCheck or EFS check? All right, so here's how it would work. If you don't have a ComCheck or you don't have the ability to pay the lumper fee at the delivery location, which, then you probably shouldn't take the load because the lumpers need to get paid up front. You can't invoice the lumpers, right? So they're going to look for a ComCheck. For those of you that don't know what a ComCheck is, it's a way to transfer funds immediately through an app that ComData has, and it allows you to pay people quickly in transportation. And it's a really good tool, especially for fuel advances and for lumper fees, right? So you should know from the shipper on the front end if there's a lumper fee. And if you aren't able to facilitate the lumper fee, you need to do one of two things. Either don't take the load, or you have to let the carrier know up front that they have to pay the lumper fee and that you will reimburse them. That's the only thing you can do. Those are the two options. Either the carrier has to issue them a ComCheck or pay the lumper fee, and then you will reimburse the carrier through the invoice, or don't take the load. Those are the only two options you really have. Good question. Thank you. So here's a common question. What percentage on average should a broker make on freight? On average for truckload, I'm going to speak specifically to truckload freight. On average, truckload freight for brokerage should be in and around 15%. It will typically range somewhere between 10 and 20. That'll be dependent upon the length, the type of equipment, the complexity of the load, the dollar value of the load. So there's a lot of variables, but what you'll find is it's somewhere between 10 and 20%, with most falling somewhere in that 15% range. Okay. I always tell every broker to make sure that regardless of your percentage, you're making at least $100 per load. So if you're invoicing a shipper $600, you still need to make $100. So you would have paid the carrier $500 again, or whether they're paying $500 or $400. As a broker, you need to try to make sure you have a mini. What I call a mini is making at least $100 per load to make it worth your time, energy, and resources to find the truck, dispatch the truck, invoice the shipper, pay the carrier, because those are operational costs that you have to recover. You're going to make very little money if you try to make $50 a load. You're probably going to lose money. Okay, so try to set a 10 to 20% profit margin with a minimum of $100 per load, no matter how long or short the transaction is. Good question. Thank you. So here's a good question. Amanda asked, are the accessorial charges the responsibility of an agent? All right, so if you are a freight agent operating under a freight broker, you will have a broker agent contract. That contract will typically determine what you are responsible for, what you are not responsible for. Typically what happens is you will be responsible as an agent to have a minimum profit per load. So if you do not if you have accessorial charges, you have to pay the carrier and you're not able to pay the shipper, that could cut into your profit. But if you got to pay $50 detention to your shipper or to your carrier, and you're going to charge the shipper $50, it's a pass-through, so it doesn't cut into your profit margin. So as an agent, you are responsible to make sure you negotiate and facilitate those accessorial charges, but you should not personally be responsible for those accessorial charges. Again, your broker agent agreement will dictate what you're responsible for, and every brokerage is a little different. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's fair for a broker to try to hold you as an agent responsible for accessorial charges, but they will, in many cases, require you to have a minimum profit per load. And if you don't have that minimum profit per load, it could cost you out of your own commission. So it's pretty rare for that to happen. But again, Most agents, like for example, the average agent, my last year I had my brokerage made over $107,000 from home. Top agents made over $500,000. I had an agent. I've had agents that I've paid over $100,000 in 1 month as an agent. So, you can make a lot of money as an agent. It's a great way to get started. It's a great way to grow a very highly profitable business. I know agents that make $250,000, $500,000, $1 million a year or more as agents, and they have no risk as a broker because they don't have an authority, they don't have the insurance, they don't have any of that. And it's a very low startup cost. So becoming an agent is a great way to start. I highly recommend becoming an agent if you don't have a lot of experience in transportation. And even if you do, if you don't have a lot of cash or investment dollars up front, if money is tight, always start as an agent. Good question. Thank you. All right, so we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. So I'm scrolling. All right, so here's a good question I get all the time. Eric asks, how long would you say it will take someone with no experience to get the momentum going as a broker? All right, so this is a very subjective question, so the answer is going to be very subjective, right? What determines the success of a freight broker or a freight agent has to do with, number one, the level of due diligence that they've done up front, including getting trained properly by someone that knows what they're doing. Number two, the due diligence that they've done on the niche that they've chosen. And number three is the effort and energy that they put into the business. So, assuming that you've done the first two, if the third one, if there's no effort and energy and you've made 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or even 100 calls and you quit, well, then you're not going to be successful. But if you put the energy in every day and you focus and you really dedicate yourself to this and you work 8 or 10 hours a day like a normal business owner does, many times I would work 10, 12, 14 hours a day when I first started, right? I would get in the office at 6. I would usually leave it somewhere around 8. That was like an average day for me. And that was early on. And the reason why is because I wanted to front load that effort. I wanted to try to make as much progress as I could because I knew that momentum that you're talking about is a very powerful force, but it's also very fickle. If you don't put enough effort, it's impossible to get momentum. So think about this. Imagine a big boulder sitting in the middle of your living room and it weighs 1,000 pounds, right? When you start pushing that boulder and you try to move it out of the living room, it's very heavy. And sometimes it's almost impossible to get moving, right? And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. And you burn a lot of calories and you're going to be sweating and you're going to be stressed out. And then all of a sudden you get it to move 2 inches and then 3 inches and then 4 inches. And every inch that you get it to move further, that inch turns into a foot and that foot turns into a yard. And then all of a sudden it starts getting momentum. And then all of a sudden it's hard to stop. And that's how a business is. That's how the freight brokerage is. So I can't give you a hard answer on how long it's going to take, but I think that you should start to be able to develop some strong momentum personally in your first 30 to 60 days. I had a student of mine, his name's Franklin Ndekwe. I did an interview with him not long ago. In his second month as a broker, he had no brokerage experience. In his second month as a broker, he did over $25,000 in profit. Okay. Now, not everybody's going to do that. Matter of fact, most of you won't do that. Okay. And everybody's going to vary. But the fact is that if you follow those steps, get trained by somebody that's reputable, credible, knows what they're doing. Number 2, do the proper due diligence on your niche and identify a niche that you want to really dig into. And number 3, put a lot of energy to having conversations with that niche. I think in your first 30 to 90 days, you can start getting a good amount of momentum. You can start moving freight. You can start generating some cash flow. And I think after your first year, you'll have enough momentum that it'll be hard to stop as long as you don't stop, right? So your business will have a life of its own. You'll have a steady base of shippers. You'll have strong carrier relations. You'll have profits. And you'll have a successful, what most would consider to be a successful business that you could take as far as you choose. So I hope that answers your question, Eric. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I'm going to wrap it up here. That's the last question for today. But if you guys enjoyed the training and you want me to come back next week, make sure you like this stream. Make sure you share the stream. I remember the people who share the stream, and when they want a question answered in a future Q&A, I always remember those people and try to put them at the top of the list. Again, I don't charge for these. As long as you guys are engaging, as long as you guys are liking, commenting, sharing, and I'm getting great feedback, I will come back every week and give my all to you every week for free. Again, this is Freight Broker Bootcamp Live. If you guys are curious and you really want to dive into the training on how to get started as a freight broker or freight agent in 30 days or less, check out freightbrokerbootcamp.com. Again, freightbrokerbootcamp.com, trained over 8,000 students, been in business over a decade, and we offer a 60-day, 100% money back guarantee. And this is the training that I put together as a broker, and I've done over $200 million as a freight broker myself. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Have an awesome day. I'm excited that this new streaming software worked and seems to be pretty reliable. So I will be back Monday at noon. Have an awesome day, and we'll talk soon.